She's the one who couldn't hold anything together. My mother said it the way she always did, not loudly, not cruelly, just matter-of-factly, like she was reading a grocery list. Like my entire life was a fact she'd long since stopped arguing about. I was standing 3 feet behind her. She didn't know that. I'd come around the corner of the venue hallway looking for my coat check ticket, and I stopped when I heard my name, the way you always stop. The way you always hope you misheard and always know you didn't. The woman she was talking to, Aunt Carol, I recognized the perfume, made a soft, sympathetic sound. "Oh, Barbara." "She means well," my mother continued. "She always has, but she never could just settle into something and stay." I turned around and walked back the way I came. I didn't say anything. I didn't cry. I'd had 31 years of practice. But what neither of them knew, what nobody in that wedding venue knew, except for one person who hadn't arrived yet, was that 20 minutes earlier my phone had buzzed with a message that read, "We need you at Quantico by 600 Monday. Director's request. Don't be late." And that was just the second time that week. A few hours earlier, I almost turned around in the parking lot. It was a Saturday in September, the kind of day coastal Georgia does better than anywhere else. Salt air, low gold light, live oaks dripping with Spanish moss along the lane leading up to Magnolia Bluff, which was the sort of venue that made you feel underdressed even in formal clothes. I sat in my rental car for 6 minutes. I know it was 6 because I counted. My name is Diane Calloway. I'm 31 years old. I work for the federal government. That's the version I give to people at family gatherings, and they usually nod and move on because federal government sounds like paperwork and conference calls, and nobody wants to talk about either of those things at a wedding, which suits me just fine. I grew up in Beaufort, South Carolina, the middle of 3 daughters. My older sister, Renee, is a cardiologist in Charlotte. My younger sister, Amy, the reason I was currently sitting in a rental car outside a $40,000 wedding venue, is a kindergarten teacher who'd somehow landed a man with a beach house in Hilton Head and another one in Colorado. They were beautiful together. Genuinely. I don't say that with bitterness. I say it because it mattered later. And then there was me, the one who left home at 22 and barely came back. The one who missed Christmas 3 years running with explanations that sounded like excuses. The one who never married, never settled, who showed up to family events with dark circles under her eyes and a tendency to sit facing the door. The one they called the family ghost. I got out of the car. I straightened my dress, navy blue, simple, the most civilian thing I owned. No badge, no service weapon, no lanyard, no credentials, none of the surface layer of my actual life. Just Diane. Just the middle daughter. Just the one who couldn't hold anything together. The venue coordinator spotted me near the entrance and handed me a program with both hands and a warm smile. I thanked her. I found my seat, B7, middle section aisle, and I sat down and watched my family gather at the front of the room like a photograph I'd seen from a distance my whole life. My father, Robert Calloway, stood near the altar talking to the groom's family. At 64, he still had the bearing of the high school football coach he'd been for 30 years. Shoulders back, chin up, voice that carried. He laughed at something the groom's father said and clapped the man on the arm. My mother spotted me from across the room. She crossed over and hugged me, and for a moment I let myself think it might be a good day. "You made it," she said. "I said I would." She pulled back and looked me over the way she always did, cataloging something. "You look tired. Long flight." She nodded like that explained everything about me. Then she saw someone else she needed to speak to, and she was gone. I watched my father from across the room. He caught my eye once, gave me a nod. The kind of nod you give a distant acquaintance at a work event. I nodded back. We'd been having that conversation for years. The ceremony was beautiful. Amy was beautiful. She cried when she saw her groom at the end of the aisle, and he pressed his forehead to hers for a moment before the music swelled, and there were at least 40 phones raised in the air to capture it. I sat in row B and watched my little sister get married and felt something complicated move through my chest. Not jealousy, not sadness exactly. Something closer to longing for a version of my life where I'd made different choices, or maybe where different choices had been available to me. But that's the thing about the path I took. You don't always see the door you're walking through until it closes behind you. The reception moved to the adjacent ballroom. Magnolia Bluff had the whole setup, ceremony terrace into a grand interior hall, chandelier lighting, round tables with centerpieces that probably cost more than my first apartment. A jazz quartet played near the far wall. Staff moved through the room with champagne and crab cakes and those little caprese skewers that disappear off trays faster than anything else. I found my table, D4, near the back, which I appreciated, and sat down. An older couple I didn't recognize was already seated to my left. He introduced himself as Frank Durbin, retired. She was Patricia. They were friends of the groom's family from Hilton Head. Very nice people. They asked what I did, and I said federal government, and Frank nodded and said his nephew worked at the Treasury Department, and we talked about the drive down from Beaufort until the salads arrived. Normal. That's the word for it. I was having a completely normal wedding experience, and I was almost relaxed, almost comfortable in my own skin at a Calloway family event for the first time in recent memory. That's when my cousin Tyler appeared at my elbow. Tyler is 27 and does something in digital marketing and has strong opinions about things he's never personally experienced. He sat down in the empty chair across from me without being invited, which was a Tyler signature move. "Diane, you actually came. Amy's my sister." "Right, right." He looked around the room with the expression of someone who finds everything slightly amusing. "You seeing anyone?" "No. Still doing the whole mysterious government job thing?" "Yep." He leaned back in his chair. "You know, my mom thinks you work at the DMV. "Your mom knows what I told her," he laughed. "Okay, that's fair." He reached for a roll from the bread basket. "You know what Dad said about you at Thanksgiving? This is like 2 years ago." I kept my face neutral. "What did he say?" "He said you were the kind of person who keeps running from things and calls it a career." I looked at him. Tyler's expression shifted just slightly. "I'm not saying I agree. I know." He picked at his roll and changed the subject, and I let him, because the alternative was 31 years of explanation I had neither the clearance nor the energy to provide. That's when I heard my mother's voice from the hallway. "I've already told you what I heard." I walked back to the table. I drank a glass of water. I watched Amy and her husband have their first dance, and I clapped when everyone else did, and I smiled because Amy deserved a smiling sister at her wedding, and none of what was happening in my chest was her fault. She never knew the whole truth either. None of them did. That's what I'd chosen. That's what the job required, and honestly, if I'm telling the whole truth, it's also what I needed. There's a kind of shelter in being underestimated. When people expect nothing of you, you can do enormous things without anyone looking directly at you. In my line of work, not being looked at directly is a survival trait. But sometimes the shelter becomes a cage. And you don't always know which side of that line you're standing on until someone calls you a failure in a coat check hallway, and you realize you've been letting them. Dinner came. My father made his toast warm, funny. He'd always been a good speaker, and he talked about Amy's kindness and the groom's character and how some people are just made for each other. He cried a little. My mother dabbed her eyes. Renee caught my gaze from across the room and gave me a tight smile. I smiled back. The plates were cleared. The cake was cut. The dancing resumed, and I had almost made it. I was calculating my exit, polite goodbye to Amy, congratulations to the groom, out the door by 9, when my father sat down in the empty chair across from me. He had a glass of bourbon. He looked comfortable the way powerful men always look comfortable, like the room had been arranged for him. "You eating okay?" he said. "Fine." He nodded. He swirled his glass. This was the closest we got to conversation, short sentences, neutral ground, careful terrain. "You still enjoying the government work?" The word enjoying landed wrong, but I let it go. "It's important work." He made a sound, not dismissive, just unconvinced. "You've been saying that for a decade. It's been true for a decade." He looked at me then. "Diane, I don't say this to be harsh, but," he turned the glass in his hands, "you could have done something real by now. Renee has a practice. Amy has a life." He paused. "You have whatever it is you have." I held his gaze. "I know what I have, Dad. I just wonder sometimes." He looked toward the dance floor. "Your mother worries." "I know she does. That's all I'm saying." "I hear you." He stood. He touched my shoulder briefly, 2 pats the Calloway way, and walked back toward the bar. I sat with my hands folded in my lap for a long moment, calm, still, waiting for it to pass. That's when my phone buzzed in my clutch. I slid it out under the table. The message was from a number I had saved under a single initial. "Outside, blue sedan. Rosie, you have 5 minutes if you want them." I read it twice. Then I read the table. Frank and Patricia were dancing. Tyler had drifted toward the bar. Renee was occupied with the groom's mother. I stood, smoothed my dress, and walked toward the rear exit. The night air was warm and soft the way Georgia evenings get in September, that particular combination of still heat and cricket sound that always reminded me of the early days. Before everything. Before I understood what I was walking into. Row C of the parking lot, blue sedan. I found it in 30 seconds, old habit, and the window rolled down before I got there. The man inside was in his late 50s, silver-haired, a face like a topographic map of difficult decisions. He was wearing a suit jacket despite the heat, which told you everything you needed to know about him. "Deputy Director," I said. "Calloway." He handed a folder through the window. "Don't open that here." I held it against my side. "You drove down from D.C. for this. Someone had to? You could have called." He looked at me steadily. "This isn't a phone call." I knew what that meant. I'd been using that phrase myself for years, the classification of a conversation that couldn't exist in any retrievable form, that had to happen in person, that mattered enough to put a deputy director of the FBI in a parking lot outside a wedding venue in coastal Georgia on a Saturday night. "The director briefed me yesterday," he said. "Operation Cardinal, we have a window." I felt something shift in my chest. Cardinal had been 18 months of my life, 18 months of work so close to the edge of what was survivable that I'd stopped sleeping in hotel rooms with unlocked windows. 18 months we'd watched fall apart in March and then somehow start reassembling itself in August. "How long is the window?" I said. 72 hours, maybe less. "And the director wants me." "The director asked for you by name." He held my gaze, "specifically in a room full of people who outrank you by 3 pay grades." I stood in the warm evening air, folder pressed to my side, and thought about my father's hand on my shoulder, 2 pats, the way he'd said whatever it is you have. "There's no one else who can run the intercept position," the deputy director said. It wasn't a question. "I know," I said. He waited. "I'll be at Quantico by 05:30, I said. "I need 20 minutes inside." He nodded once. "Don't tell them anything you don't have to." "When do I ever?" He almost smiled. Then the window rolled up and the sedan pulled quietly out of the row, and I stood there alone for a moment in the Georgia dark. I looked down at the folder. On the cover, in black type, CALLOWAYD, Operation Cardinal Level 4 Restricted. I'd spent 6 years becoming the person whose name was on that cover. 6 years that looked from the outside like failure. I tucked the folder inside my clutch, it fit barely, and walked back toward the venue. The problem, if I'm being honest, started long before that night. It started when I was 22 and finishing my political science degree at USC, and a woman in a gray suit sat down across from me in the university library and asked me 7 questions in 20 minutes. I answered all of them. She left. 3 days later, I got a phone call. I didn't tell my parents what the call was about. I told them I'd gotten a federal job in D.C., entry-level, administrative. My father had nodded the way he would continue nodding for the next decade, present but unconvinced, waiting for me to pivot towards something he could introduce at dinner parties. Renee graduated from Duke Medical School that same year. At Christmas, my father spent 20 minutes describing her surgical rotation to relatives I barely knew. He spent 2 minutes asking me how things were going in D.C. I told him fine. They were fine. They were also classified. My first field posting was 18 months after I joined. I can't tell you where. I can tell you I was 24 years old and I spoke 3 languages, 2 of them fluently, and the work I did in those 14 months resulted in the disruption of a financial network that had been funding operations in 4 countries for the better part of a decade. I came home weighing 11 pounds less than I left. My mother said I looked tired. I said long hours. I worked counterterrorism, then organized crime, then a joint task force whose existence I still can't fully confirm in public settings. I missed Christmas again. I missed Renee's wedding. I sent a gift and a card and called from a number that would have confused anyone who tried to call it back. I missed my grandfather's funeral. I stood in an airport in a country whose name I couldn't say and watched the notification appear on my phone, and I held my coat against the cold and did what needed to be done. And I came home, and my father said, well, it's a shame about the timing, and my mother said she wasn't sure what exactly I did over there, and I said federal work, and we moved on. The promotion to senior agent came when I was 27. Commendation, a thing that exists in a file in a building in Virginia and will never appear in any searchable record, came a year after that. The director had called me personally. He had said, "Calloway, the work you did on this deserves recognition, and the only recognition I can give you is telling you directly that I know what it cost." I'd held the phone and stared out the window of a safe house in a city I can't name and said, "Thank you, sir." He said, "Don't thank me. Rest." I didn't rest. And then came Cardinal. Cardinal was 18 months of the most technically demanding, personally isolating, professionally consequential work I had ever been part of. A network, a money trail, a set of relationships that crossed jurisdictions and agencies and international lines in ways that made every previous case look simple. I had built the intercept architecture from scratch. I had recruited 2 sources who were still active. I had run the operation almost entirely alone for 6 months before we'd had enough to bring in additional personnel. And in March, we'd hit a wall. The primary target had gone quiet. The network had restructured. We'd lost 2 months of work in a week. I'd driven home from Quantico on a Tuesday night in March and sat in my apartment and stared at the wall and thought about my father's voice. You could have done something real by now, but a thing that's broken isn't always finished. And here in September, in a parking lot in Georgia, a deputy director had driven 4 hours to tell me the window had reopened. I went back inside. I found Amy near the cake table, laughing with her new husband about something, and she turned when she saw me and lit up the way she always did. Amy had been lighting up when she saw people her whole life. It was her particular gift, and she hugged me. "You're not leaving," she said. It wasn't a question. "I have to." She pulled back and looked at my face. Amy was perceptive the way quiet people sometimes are. "Is it work?" she said. "Yes," she studied me. "The real work," I blinked. "What?" She smiled, and it was a complicated smile, the kind that held more information than I expected. "Di, I'm 30 years old. I've been watching you show up and disappear my whole life, and not once have you ever looked scared about the leaving. You always look like you're going back to something." She tilted her head. "I don't know what it is, I've stopped asking, but I know it matters. The things you don't expect to hear at your sister's wedding. I'm sorry I'm leaving early," I said. "Don't apologize, just come back sometime when you can actually stay." She hugged me again. "And Diane, whatever it is you do out there, I hope you know we're proud of you." I held on to that for a moment longer than I meant to. "I'll call when I can," I said. I said goodbye to Renee, who hugged me and didn't ask questions because Renee had always been good at reading rooms. I waved to the groom, who waved back warmly. I thanked the venue coordinator on my way out. My parents were near the dance floor. I went to them. My father saw me coming, and his expression shifted, not welcoming exactly, but not closed either. My mother turned from her conversation. "I have to go," I said. "Work." My mother frowned. "Tonight, it's your sister's." "I know." "I'm sorry," I kissed her cheek. "Tell Amy I love her again." My father was looking at me with the same expression he'd worn my whole life, a mix of things I couldn't fully parse, disappointment, something else underneath it that I'd spent 31 years not being able to name. "Take care of yourself," he said. "I always do." I turned to go. "Deanne." I stopped. My father had a voice that could carry across a football field. He used about 10% of it now. "Who called you?" I looked back at him. "Tonight," he said. Out in the parking lot, he'd seen, of course he had. Retired football coaches notice things. It's the same muscle as field generals, as investigators, the habit of tracking the room. I held his gaze. "Dad," I said, "I can't tell you." He stared at me. His jaw moved slightly. I watched something shift in his face, just slightly, the first small movement of something that had been still for a long time. "Okay," he said, just that, quiet. "Okay." I nodded once, then I walked out. I was in the lobby pulling up my phone to request a car when the doors behind me opened and someone called my name. Not Deanne, not Ms. Calloway, the name they used. I turned. A man in his early 40s stood near the entrance, slightly out of breath. He was in a tuxedo, guest then, not staff, with a lapel pin I recognized immediately. I recognized it because I'd seen it on the lanyard of every agent who'd passed through the Joint Task Force in 2019. A small thing, 3 initials that most people wouldn't notice. He was looking at me like he was trying to confirm something he wasn't sure about. "Calloway?" he said again. "Who's asking?" I said. "Special Agent Marcus Webb," he exhaled. "I'm Ethan's cousin, the groom." He ran a hand through his hair. "I've been sitting 20 feet from you for 3 hours, and I didn't put it together until someone said your last name, and I thought—" He stopped. "Cardinal, you're Cardinal. You're the one who built the Meridian Intercepts." The lobby was empty except for us and 2 venue staff at the far end. I kept my voice level. "I don't know what you're talking about." He almost laughed. "My entire team spent 8 months trying to figure out who built that architecture. The closest we got was a single initial source code and a clearance level that made my supervisor nervous." He shook his head. "You're the architect." I looked at him for a long moment. "You weren't supposed to be here," I said finally. "Neither were you from the sound of it." He paused. "My supervisor is going to lose his mind. Your supervisor doesn't need to know anything. He already does." He reached into his jacket and produced a phone, angled the screen toward me. A message thread. "The top, if you see Calloway, tell her Webb confirms the Quantico request. She'll know what it means." I read it twice. "How many people?" I said. "In our unit, 7. He met my eyes. "And every single one of them is going to remember the day I told them who Cardinal was." I considered him. He had good posture and direct eye contact and the particular stillness of someone who'd been trained to notice exits, an agent's agent. "Don't tell them anything yet," I said. "Understood." He paused. "For what it's worth." He glanced toward the ballroom doors. "Whatever you've been doing, the results speak." He straightened slightly. "It's an honor, ma'am." That word landed in my chest. I'd heard it in briefing rooms, in field locations whose names I'd never repeat, in the director's office on a morning in February when he'd closed the door and told me what the operation had prevented. I'd never heard it here. In a wedding venue lobby in coastal Georgia from a man in a tuxedo who'd figured out in 20 feet what my own family hadn't managed in 31 years. "Thank you, Agent Webb," I said. "Enjoy the reception." I walked out into the Georgia evening. The doors opened behind me. I didn't need to turn to know the footsteps. My father's gait hadn't changed in 20 years. He came to stand beside me. We were outside the main entrance now, the live oaks catching the lights from the venue, moss swaying in the slight breeze off the river. He was quiet for a moment. "That man who stopped you," he said. "In the lobby." "Yes." "He called you," he stopped, tried again. "He called you something, ma'am." He said the word carefully like he was testing its weight. "Not as a courtesy." I said nothing. "He stood up straighter," my father said. "When you turned around, he stood up straighter." The crickets, the river. The distant sound of jazz from inside. "I used to do that," my father said quietly. "When a coach I respected walked into a room." I looked at him. His face was doing something complicated. Robert Calloway had coached football for 30 years. He understood hierarchy. He understood what the body does when it recognizes authority. He had just watched a man in a tuxedo go through that reflex across a lobby floor for his daughter. "The government job," he said. "Yes." "It's not administration." "No," he was quiet. In 31 years, I could count the number of times my father had been quiet on one hand. "The Christmas you missed," he said. "The years you didn't call." He turned the bourbon glass in his hand. He'd brought it out with him. "The way you sit in rooms, facing the door," I said. "Yes," he exhaled slowly. "I thought it was just restlessness. I thought you couldn't commit to anything." I looked at the oak trees. "I was committed," I said. "Just not to anything visible." A long pause. "That man said it was an honor," my father said. "Yes. He didn't say it the way people say it at a ceremony. No, he said it like he meant it about something specific." "He did." My father turned his glass over in his hands, steadily, carefully. "Can you tell me anything?" he said. "Not tonight." He nodded slowly. Then, after a moment, "Was it dangerous?" I thought about the 14 months I'd lost 11 pounds. About the February morning in the director's office. About Cardinal and what the window opening meant and what would happen on Monday at 5:30 in a room at Quantico where people were waiting for me by name. "Sometimes," I said. My father set the glass down on the railing beside us. He turned toward me, and for the first time in 31 years, he looked directly at me with no performance in his face. No coaching voice. No quiet dismissal. Just a man seeing something he should have seen a long time ago. "I didn't know," he said. "I know. I thought," he stopped. "I thought you were hiding from something." "I was," I said. "I was hiding from people who couldn't know what I did." He closed his eyes briefly. "Including us," he said. "Especially you would have worried." "Deanne." His voice cracked just slightly at the edge of it. I had spent 31 years waiting to hear something in my father's voice that sounded like that. That particular register, the one that means the wall has come down. "I would have been right to worry," he said. "Yes." He turned back toward the live oaks. The moss moved softly in the dark. "Your mother's going to take this hard," he said after a while. "I'll call her," I said. "When I can," he nodded. "How long?" he said. "This trip." "I don't know yet." He made a sound, not dismissal this time, something older, something that might have been understanding. "Okay." I picked up my bag from the bench near the entrance. "Deanne." He didn't look at me. "I'm sorry for tonight, for before." I looked at my father standing in the Georgia evening beside a railing in a tuxedo, an older man in a life he understood, with a daughter he'd been wrong about for 31 years. "I know, Dad," I said. He finally looked at me. His eyes were bright. "Come home sometime," he said, "when you can." "I will." He nodded once, 2 pats, but different this time, slower. Like he was trying to memorize something. I walked toward the car that had arrived at the curb. I didn't look back, not because I didn't want to, because I had learned a long time ago that the way forward requires looking forward, and sentiment is a luxury you buy on the other side of the work. But I heard him. Standing at the railing in the warm Georgia night, my father said something I had never, not once in 31 years, heard him say. He said, "I'm proud of you." Quiet, just for me. Just for the live oaks and the Spanish moss and the river he couldn't see from there. I kept walking, but I heard him. I crossed the Georgia state line at 11:47 p.m., the folders sealed in my bag, the radio low, the highway dark and empty and stretching north. By the time I cleared the first checkpoint at Quantico the following Monday morning, badge presented, retinal confirmed, the kind of sequence that takes 4 minutes and makes most people nervous, the deputy director was waiting in the hall. "You're early," he said. I said 05:30. It's 05:12. "I know." He walked with me toward the briefing room. Through the narrow window in the door, I could see 7 people at the table, a projection, a map I recognized. "The director's already inside," he said. "I know." He paused before the door. "You sure you're ready for this?" I thought about my father's voice in the dark, what had been on his face when he'd watched a federal agent stand up straight across a lobby floor for his daughter. I thought about Amy's arms around me and her words that had landed somewhere I wasn't prepared for. "Whatever it is you do out there, I hope you know we're proud of you." I pushed open the briefing room door. 7 people looked up. The director said, "Calloway, good, let's begin." And I sat down, and we began. There are things I still can't tell you about what happened after. Maybe someday, maybe never. The nature of the work is that the most important parts of your life happen in rooms that don't exist in any searchable record in front of people whose names you never repeat, about events that the public learns about years later and sometimes never. But I can tell you this. My father called me 6 weeks later. It was the first time in recent memory that he'd called me rather than waiting for me to call him. He asked how I was. I said fine. He said good. Then he said, I talked to your mother. About how we handled things over the years. He paused. She took it hard, like I said. I'm sorry. Don't be. Another pause. She's proud of you, Diane. She's always been proud of you. She just didn't know what exactly she was proud of. I sat with that for a moment. Tell her I'll call, I said. She knows, a long breath. You know what I keep thinking about? What? That man in the lobby. His voice had gone quiet. He looked at you the way my players used to look at each other after a game that cost something real. He stopped. I didn't understand it until I did. I looked out my apartment window at the November gray. You were never running from things, he said. No, you were running toward them. The things you don't expect your father to say. Yeah, Dad, I said. I was. He cleared his throat. Don't be a stranger. I'll try. Deanne. His voice, that old carry-across-a-field voice, reduced to something careful and human. Whatever you're doing out there. He stopped, started again. Just come home when you can. I will, I said, and this time I meant it differently than I ever had before. The quiet ones at the family table, the ones who say fine and federal work and change the subject. The ones who show up looking tired and sit facing the door and leave early without explanation. Sometimes they're running away from something. Sometimes they're running towards something you don't have clearance to know about. The difference matters. If there's someone in your life you've underestimated, someone you've defined by their absence, their silence, their inability to fit the story you expected them to live, maybe consider what you don't know about them yet. Maybe consider what they've been carrying in rooms you've never seen. And if you've ever been the one who sat quietly while the people you loved built a version of you that didn't quite fit, I hope you know this. Being unseen is not the same as being nothing. The work you do in the dark still matters in the light. If this story touched something in you, share it with someone who's been quietly underestimated. And if you've been that person yourself, I hope you remember that the truth, eventually, has a way of arriving right on time.